can be saved. Jesus looked at them and said, "For mortals it is impossible, but not for God. For God, all things are possible." In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Several decades ago, the credit card company, American Express, had an advertising slogan: "Membership has its privileges." The subtext of this ad campaign was that if you were affluent enough to qualify for an Amex card, something of status symbol, you were somehow special, set apart. You were entitled. In short, you were privileged. Wealth tends to buy privileges in the modern world, and it was no different in Jesus' time. Indeed, in Jesus' world, wealth was often seen as a reward for faithfully following God's commandments. Today, some who call themselves Christians espouse the religious belief known as the prosperity gospel or prosperity theology. This aberrant doctrine claims that God will reward a person's faith, manifested, of course, by his or her substantial tithing, with financial blessings and even physical well-being. In short, this toxic theology claims that God will deliver security and prosperity, guaranteed. In a sense, it's the religious version of that old American Express ad campaign: "Membership has its privileges." Now, this does not mean that prosperity cannot ever be seen as coming from God. It can, just as we see wisdom, talent, generosity, opportunity, and a host of other things as gifts from God. Too often, however, we fail to recognize that every God-given gift carries with it God's hope for how it might be best used. As Christians, joy for us is when we align our use of the gifts God gives us with what we discern to be God's hope. God's hope for us, for our communities, and for the building of God's kingdom right here on earth. The gospel passage appointed for today is a familiar one to many of us. The version that we just heard is from Mark's gospel, but the story also appears in the gospels of Matthew and Luke. It's commonly known as the story of the rich young man, although the man's age is never revealed in Mark's version. In Matthew's telling, he's described as being young, and in Luke's, he is referred to as a ruler. These details aside, the man is identified in all three synoptic gospels as having many possessions. And this is the story's true core: wealth and privilege, and their role in this man's life and in our own lives 2 millennia later. It's an uncomfortable gospel at first glance. A man kneels before Jesus and asks how he can inherit eternal life. He seems sincere. He seems to be seeking something intangible, something more meaningful than all of his many possessions. So when Jesus talks to him about keeping the commandments, he replies eagerly, "Teacher, I have kept all these since my youth. After all, what more could Jesus want than someone who's kept all the commandments throughout his entire life? Right? But Jesus wants more. He instructs the man to sell all his belongings, give the proceeds to the underprivileged, and then, and only then, to follow him. This stuns the man, who is shocked, we are told, at Jesus' words, and goes away grieving, for he has many possessions. He just can't let go. We feel for this man, but the story also makes us uncomfortable. We too want to follow Jesus. But look at all of the belongings most of us have. And to be perfectly honest, how many of us can say that we have faithfully kept all the commandments since our youth? Like Jesus' disciples, we may be tempted to say, then who can be saved? But if we only focus on this part of the passage, well, the answer then might be not many. But possessions are not only tangible objects. Possessions are also our prejudices, our values, and our attitudes. I believe that Jesus is telling the man and his disciples and each and every one of us across space and time that we need to figure out what is in us that is a stumbling block, a detriment to our living our lives as beloved children of God. First, he tells us we need to figure that out. And then, and only then, do something about it. If we happen to have numerous material possessions, we may need to think long and hard about whether or not we and our loved ones really need them. Do we really want and need all this stuff? How might we use our possessions to help those who are experiencing hardship and misfortune? Do we cling to attitudes or prejudices that exclude others or are self-righteous? Are we so wrapped up in our own wants and so-called needs that we're no longer careful about being good stewards of our world, God's creation, or its people, God's beloved children? Jesus calls us to re-examine our priorities and then to repent as individuals, as families, as faith communities. Perhaps all of our possessions are not signs of God's blessings, but rather barriers to a life-altering relationship with God. Doing this kind of profound personal examination is not easy. There are no quick fixes. It takes prayer and being honest, really honest with ourselves, and seriously deciding that we want, indeed we yearn, we long to live as a people of God. If we're really serious about this re-examination, and we should be if we're going to call ourselves God's people, then we'll find it to be challenging. But a challenge that is one of the greatest, that has one of the greatest of all rewards, which is the inheritance of God's kingdom. But make no mistake about it, it is challenging. Jesus tells us all through Mark's gospel that he came to serve, not to be served. For Jesus, And so many of us who call ourselves Christians, ministry at its very essence is servant ministry. Our lives should be lives of service to each other. Many times that means going beyond ourselves, letting go of what we want in order to reach out to others in need. But conversely, it also means that when we're in need, others in the community will reach out to us in love. That's the wonderful thing about being part of a community of faith. Everyone should be held in love by a community. No one should be excluded. And always remember that when we care for and love those in need, we are caring for and loving Jesus. And speaking of love, let's not forget that Jesus' response to the rich man's plea is grounded in love. Indeed, the text says, Jesus, looking at him, loved him, and said. Jesus' reply is deeply rooted, not in envy or distrust or a desire to put down one who is in a position of privilege and worldly wealth. Rather, Jesus' response comes from the kind of love that yearns for this man to truly know his true worth, without the possessions, without the social status, and to comprehend the myriad ways in which God's love wants to provide for him in ways he can never provide for himself, and to help him know with complete confidence that he is indeed one of God's beloved. And knowing that, to make a conscious decision to live into that light and love. So if we take this gospel seriously, it just might turn our lives upside down. Yes, Jesus is calling us to get rid of the stumbling blocks in our lives. He lets us know that it's not easy to get rid of them, and that deciding to try can sometimes lead us to the cross. But he also lets us know that if we do, he promises a reward many times greater than all that stuff that we've been clinging to. This can be difficult to grasp, especially in our culture that urges us to acquire, to accumulate, to amass as much as we can. It is difficult to grasp that letting go may be the most important lesson of all on this earthly journey. But our covenant with God to love one another requires that we consider our choices and our actions. The awareness of our neighbors and their very real needs is the first step toward understanding what the gospel is calling us to do. Jesus teaches us that true humility is surrendering the false security of possessions and becoming good stewards of all creation. So, along with our God-given free will comes choice. We all have a choice. We can walk away shocked and grieving like the man in today's gospel. Or we can get on with the work of really living and loving and working and serving as God's people. It's our choice.